Our connection to Amistad actually started sort of serendipitously around the time that we were planning this program with a simple email and a question about butterflies. And I want to first show you, oh, there we go. I want to first show you, you may not think that our park, Blackstone River Valley and Amistad National Recreation Area have that much in common. We are 2,000 miles away, and that might seem like a pretty big journey, but there are actually generations of butterflies who make that journey every single year. And that's how we first connected with people from Amistad. And I will take absolutely no credit for this. We have great colleagues and community partners and volunteers who run a number of pollinator gardens. And that was what first caught the attention of staff all those 2,000 miles away at Amistad. Of all the 429 units that are now part of the National Park Service, it would be really hard to try to visit all of these in a year. There is someone who recently tried to do it for the Guinness World Book of Records, but we have these small creatures, these butterflies, that are pretty much lapping us in that effort because they have these cyclical generations who are making this journey from the border in Texas, close to Amistad, to Blackstone and points further north and around the country every single year. I got thinking about how kind of special this connection is and how kind of strange and unexpected, and it made me think about something called the butterfly effect. This idea that even the small flap of a butterfly's wings in any part of the world can impact people who are thousands of miles away. There's this idea that we can't move even a single grain of sand without impacting people all over the world. People use this to theorize about weather patterns, mathematics, philosophy, and more. But it's really just kind of a beautiful idea that this butterfly who might be flying around the Blackstone Valley or flying around Texas might have this connection that unites us in different parts of the country. Jack's presentation tonight is going to give you an insider's view into Amistad National Recreation Area and tell you about some feats of human engineering that really changed the landscape there. And I'm going to start by talking about one of the pathways that butterflies and people and horses and boats have been traveling along for the past 200 years. If we were to go back in time, and Jack is also going to take us back to 1793, Pawtucket, where our park headquarters is based out of, would look very different than it does today. This is an artist rendering that gives you a sense of what that part of Pawtucket would look like. There's already a dam located next to a mill. Jill and I's office, sadly, is not located on this rendering just yet, but what you're seeing is the start of a very big social process and a very big set of changes that we now call industrialization, where landscapes are being transformed by people, not with big cranes and diggers and huge pieces of infrastructure, but people with hoes and other basic tools that are being made just on other parts of the same river. If we take a look at this view, we can see a waterway running through and two sets of falls. This is a rendering of the Blackstone River. The Blackstone River was powerful enough to be a great source of power for industry. That's why we're going to see mills popping up all alongside it. Starting in the 1790s, this chain process or this kind of chain reaction is going to continue to grow, and it's going to give people other ideas about how to use the landscape. It's also going to present specific challenges. Once people have started to dam this powerful river, to divert part of this river into their buildings for the use of power, they start to wonder what they could do by just making their own waterway. This is a visual of what the early Blackstone Canal looked like. And we know that there's a canal because we are seeing a boat go up north on the canal from one city to another. Blackstone River is approximately 46 miles, and starting in the mid-1820s, people built kind of a liquid highway to go alongside that Blackstone River to transport goods, and that was the canal. This was a huge undertaking done by people who would usually make $12 a month. That was for 6 days of backbreaking work per week, and every one of those weeks, they are working from sun up to sundown. If you happen to be tuning in from a place close to where I'm located, that's now. The sun is just starting to go down. When the Blackstone Canal was built, it was part of kind of three big changes or three bigger processes that were going on at the time. With the start of industry, people were producing more goods in mills and factories. They wanted to be able to move those goods faster and easier. It wasn't really possible to do that over land. The canal was a solution to that. This was also part of trying to connect people who'd previously lived in colonies in cities that were separated, not easy to travel to for humans, with each other. Other reason for building the Blackstone Canal was better control of the watershed. As people are starting to build mills and all this other infrastructure, they're realizing that nature is more fickle than they would like. Nature is not always cooperating with them. We actually talked about this just before the program. If you're in New England, it's very windy. We are hoping that nature will cooperate with us tonight. Across this whole Blackstone River Valley and across this watershed, you have people building mills, people demanding more of their river, and building this 40-plus-mile canal. But they're not just digging out the earth to remake a new kind of waterway or to reshape the Blackstone River. They're also building huge mill ponds. They're creating new sources of water because they want better control of this entire waterway. Now, this is a visual of people building an early dam along the Blackstone, but I think it's instructive. These are people who are either local yeoman farmers or people who are Irish immigrants, and they're doing this backbreaking work of reshaping the earth around them. Eventually, the canal is going to be crossing over 40-plus miles. They're going to be digging it 8 to 10 feet deep. And again, all of this is extremely backbreaking, challenging, and for very little pay because they're not just digging out that canal, they're changing the flow of water and changing really what's possible across the landscape. I love this rendering because it shows a person actually traveling, moving goods up the Blackstone Canal, shows the towpath. Some of that is still available for people to enjoy today, but it also kind of gives us the sense that this might be sort of fun. This might be a waterway that we might want to recreate on. That is true for us today, but it could also be very contentious to travel on the Blackstone Canal. We know that there are a number of times where people were deliberately trying to sabotage canal boats, where people were also taking apart dams because they were upset with these big changes to their landscape. This was not universally welcomed. Also, this was something where people were trying to make money. People had stock. They invested in the Blackstone Canal Company. If you're a person who's ever spent money on something that you regret, you can relate to the Blackstone Canal investors of the 1820s. This was not a very good investment, as it turned out. What made this canal successful was that it really primed the area even better to be ready for an expansion of industry. In the years after the canal's construction, there would be a push toward railroads, eventually to roadways, highways, more of what we see today with automobile travel. But the Blackstone Canal, dug almost exactly 200 years ago, it was the start of a very different relationship with nature, not just extracting water for the use of mills, but changing the entire flow and the entire layout in some areas of parts of the Blackstone River watershed. It can be easy to kind of lose the forest for the trees when we talk about environmental history. We consider that single flap of the butterfly wing. If we believe in this theory, we know that small things can make big changes. It took just people digging over and over with those shovels and basic hand tools. None of this was done with anything that we would recognize today as being good for construction, and yet they changed the trajectory of the Blackstone River Valley. Theme that we've explored so far this year is, in some cases, the excitement or the hubris that people have around trying to control nature, problems, challenges, and opportunities that come with that. Jack is going to talk to us now about a place thousands of miles away where nature has also not been easy to tame, but all the great opportunities that come with that as well. So I'm going to stop sharing and we'll switch to his presentation. If you are ready for that, Jack.
Let's do it.
Perfect. Helps to get the right slideshow up, I think. Okay. Trying to. There we go. Oh, sorry about that. Does not want to show. Okay. Perfect.
All right. Well, thank you, Allison, for the introduction. And a lot of those themes, controlling water and roads and railroads and um, all these things tie together here at Amistad also. And so we're going to jump into some of that. I guess my presentation is divided into three main pieces. The creation of the Amistad Reservoir, where we are and why we're where we are. There's a lot of reservoirs. Why is this one special enough to be a unit of the National Park Service? In fact, every lake in Texas except for one is an artificial reservoir. Water impounded behind a dam. There's only one natural lake in Texas, and that's Caddo Lake in far east Texas. So why is this one a National Park Service unit? And then I said transportation history, but I should have said transportation and industrial history in the area as well. Roads, railroads, hydropower, a lot of those same themes that Allison was working with. I'll talk about how those developed out here in Southwest Texas. So, slide please. All right, so here is a map of Texas and adjacent Louisiana and New Mexico and Oklahoma and Old Mexico. And you can see Amistad is there. We're about 12 miles northwest of the city of Del Rio, Texas, and our Mexican sister city of Ciudad Acuña. You can see blue lines flowing into Amistad. One of those is the Rio Grande coming in from the west, flowing past Big Bend National Park, if anyone's ever been out to Big Bend. Heading up towards El Paso, and then beyond El Paso, the Rio Grande continues on up into Colorado and Rocky Mountain National Park. Meanwhile, you can see flowing into the reservoir from the north, we've got the Pecos River flowing through Carlsbad, going past the caverns there, going on up into New Mexico near Santa Fe. So those are two of our rivers that feed the reservoir. There's a third. It doesn't show well on this map, but right above the yellow dot that says Del Rio, you see a little thumb projecting up to the northeast, and that's the Devil's River. And it is a short, spring-fed river. It's longer than it looks like it is on this map, but it's under 100 miles long. It's spring-fed. I'll show you pictures of it. It's gorgeous. And so we have these three largely spring-fed rivers flowing into the Amistad Reservoir. A lot of the water that we get from the Rio Grande is coming in the spring flow. I mean, not all spring flow, but a good chunk of it is spring flow. A fourth river that we don't necessarily think about is coming in from the Mexican side. If you look where you see Big Bend, on the west side of Big Bend, you see another little blue line trickling in from the southwest, coming in from Mexico. That's the Rio Conchos. And the drainages that make up the Rio Conchos are close enough to the Pacific Ocean. You can see the Pacific there in the lower left of the slide. So you can get, a typhoon raining on the Rio Conchos watershed, and then we get a flood on the Rio Grande from rainstorms that we never saw here in Southwest Texas. So it's immense watersheds, and as you can see, there's not a whole lot really between Big Bend and Del Rio in terms of there's no other towns. You've got Boquillas on on around the Big Bend there, but very, very little else between Big Bend and Del Rio. And so the reservoir is here primarily for flood control, and we'll talk about that because also we're fairly close to the Gulf of Mexico. So during hurricane season, we're within range from where tropical storms and hurricanes will come in off the Gulf. And then this is about where they run into cold fronts and stall out and dump large quantities of rain in short periods of time. And so our area is prone to catastrophic flooding. And one of my favorite little quirks about this area is that our our annual average rainfall is a smaller number than the year-to-year variability in rainfall. So, it can be very, very dry. We may get 6 inches of rain in a year, or we may get well over 30. So anyway, slide please. Allison was mentioning some of the development history there in her area. I chose the 1793. I think that was when one of the mills was constructed. In my world as an archaeologist, I'm usually dealing with things that are several thousands of years old. So this is all fairly recent in my world. But but in 1793, this was part of Spain. This was part of New Spain. This was part of Spain until 1821 when Mexico wins its independence. And then in 1836, Texas wins its independence from Mexico. And then Texas joins the United States in 1845. So, very, very different world out here from what's going on back east. Slide. And just kind of to illustrate that, this is an 1835 map of some land grants. But so 1835, this is a year before Texas independence. And the Mexican province or Mexican state of Texas, the boundary is not the Rio Grande. The boundary is the Nueces River. So if anybody's ever been to Corpus Christi, Texas, or been to Padre Island National Seashore, there on North Padre Island, that's where the Nueces River is flowing into the Gulf of Mexico. It wasn't until Texas won its independence that it set the boundary at the Rio Grande, and Mexico didn't accept that, and it took a war with the United States. So after statehood, Texas was accepted into the U.S. in 1845 with the Rio Grande as the boundary. Mexico did not agree with that. U.S. troops landed at Brownsville, where the Rio Grande flows into the Gulf, and so then we got the Mexican War. And so, if you want to learn more about that, Palo Alto Battlefield is another National Park Service unit that interprets that. So that was then after the Treaty of Guadalupe Hidalgo, that Nueces Strip became part of the U.S. And so if you look on the kind of the far middle left part of that map, you've got the Rio Grande. You can kind of see, it's not to scale, but you can see the bend that makes what's now Big Bend National Park. You can see the Pecos River coming in from the north, and then there's a little smaller Y-shaped river coming in, and that's the Devils. So that's the area that's now Amistad National Recreation Area, shown in this 1835 map being part of Mexico, part of the state of Coahuila. Slide. So I mentioned disastrous flooding. There had been a 1944 water treaty with Mexico calling for the creation of reservoirs along the Rio Grande to be managed by the International Boundary and Water Commission, which is a part of the U.S. State Department, and then its Mexican counterpart, SELA. The original plans were for a smaller dam. This plan called for a creation of a series of dams along the Rio Grande. Falcon Reservoir further downstream is one of these and was the first of these. They were planning for a smaller reservoir near Del Rio, but then the 1954 flood happened, and they changed the design to a much, much larger dam because the original design could not have held the 1954 flood. Hurricane Alice came in off the Gulf of Mexico and dropped 22 inches of rain in an area that normally gets maybe 16 inches in a year. And it caused the canyon of the Pecos River to flood 86 foot deep. That flooded down onto the Rio Grande. Rio Grande came up over 60 vertical feet, and it washed out the international bridges and caused massive loss of life and property. Over 15,000 people were left homeless on the Mexican side in Piedras Negras. I think over 100 people missing or killed. So that was 54. In 1958, they knew where the dam was going to have to go. NPS funded archaeological survey of the reservoir basin. That lasted for the next 10 years. In 1965, there's a cooperative agreement between the National Park Service and the IBWC for the Park Service to manage recreational resources here, and building boat ramps and picnic areas and campgrounds and that kind of thing. Amistad Dam is mostly completed in 1968, but it wasn't finally finished until 69. I'll touch on that in a second. And then in 1990, again, we'd been managing things through a cooperative agreement since 1965, but in 1990, Congress formally made us a unit of the National Park Service, and so we have 57,000 acres of land and surface waters. Slide. So here's our park map. You can see Del Rio in the lower right corner, 12 miles to our southeast, and our sister city of Acuna in Mexico. The Rio Grande River is the international boundary. Coming up the Rio Grande from Del Rio and Acuna, you see the Amistad Dam. And going up to the right, northeast from the Amistad Dam, you see the Devil's River. Our park boundary is this squiggly green line. Inconveniently to manage, we have our park boundary is the 1144.3 foot elevation contour. And so it follows that contour up every little side canyon and up all of these major rivers. And so that gives us 540 miles of shoreline on the U.S. side of the reservoir. But so we go about, about 20 miles up the Devil's River. We actually go 79 miles above the dam up the Rio Grande, and we go about 4 miles below the dam on the Rio Grande. So we have about 83 miles of river on the Rio Grande. And then we go about 14 miles up the Pecos River. So if you follow the Amistad Reservoir, follow the Rio Grande up to your left, going northwest, you see the little pink splotch there that is Seminole Canyon State Park and Historic Site. And you go just past there, you see the Pecos River coming in from the north. And but our park boundary continues on quite a ways past that. So that's us. And we have a variety of campgrounds and picnic areas and boat ramps all around the lake, and hiking trails and things. Now I'll touch on that in a second. Slide. So Amistad is the Spanish word for friendship. When they were originally planning the dam, because the dam was located right at the mouth of where the Devil's River flows into the Rio Grande, the original name for the project was the Diablo Reservoir. Diablo for devil. But since it is a cooperative international project done in the spirit of friendship, it was decided that Amistad was a much more appropriate name for the project, and it was quickly renamed the Amistad Reservoir. Slide. So I said the bulk of the construction was done in 68, and they started filling it, but the finishing touches weren't put on until 1969. And so this picture is Mexican President Gustavo Diaz Ordaz and Richard Nixon at the the event christening the dam. And this is a really fun place if you've got a passport. There's a port of entry on either the U.S. side and the Mexican side of the dam. But if you've got your passport, you can come across, and then right here in the middle, you can stand with 1 foot in the U.S. and 1 foot in Mexico, right in the center of the dam, with the Mexican eagle on one side and the American eagle on the other side. And it's super cool. So, slide. So this is during construction of the dam, looking north from below the dam. And so you see the Rio Grande going up and curving off to the left, with the Devil's River flowing in from the right. Today, that is under 200 feet of water. It's a pretty deep reservoir right in front of the dam. Slide. In fact, okay, cool. That was my next slide. So here's looking at that from the other direction. The Devil's River would have been coming in from just off the screen to your right. There's the dam in the middle. You can see there's kind of like a large building in the center of the span of the dam, and then it's kind of wider out in front of that building. And in front of the building, there's 2 little bumps. Those little bumps are the eagle statues that we saw in the previous slide. So that's the center of the dam. So that's the United States in the foreground and Mexico in the background. Slide. So purposes for the Amistad Dam and Reservoir is flood control, first and foremost. Second, almost equal, is reservoir for irrigation of the lower Rio Grande Valley. Also municipal water supply. A number of cities on both sides of the river that get their water from the Rio Grande, and also industrial uses too. It generates power, and then down the line recreation as well. And so that has brought a lot of extra business to the local community for some of these recreational opportunities. And so, slide please. So I talked about the 1954 flood being big and bad. Just to kind of put that into perspective, this is the canyon of the Pecos River where it flows into the Rio Grande. In the distance, you see the kind of the U-shaped canyon with more canyon behind it. The canyon in the background is Mexico. That is the Rio Grande. And then this canyon in the foreground that we are in is the Pecos. So we are, I think about 9/10 of a mile upstream from where the Pecos flows into the Rio Grande. And so this bridge, this is 1923. They have just completed this brand new highway bridge over the Pecos River. And this was done in the summer. So all the dignitaries are lining up with their fancy new automobiles to drive back and forth over the bridge and celebrate. But you can tell it's summer because if you look in the lower left corner of the picture, you see every single person in the photo is standing in the shade because it's over 100 degrees Fahrenheit and it's hot. So everybody's standing in the shade. So this is the brand new 1923 bridge in the canyon of the Pecos. Slide. Same bridge, different perspective. You can see all the trees. You can see, in the picture we just saw, the road was not paved yet. In this photo, the road is freshly paved. And we've got a scenic overlook shade shelter up in the right-hand corner. Some people are sitting in it, taking in the view. That shade shelter is still there. You can still take in this view today. All except it's different because that bridge is not there anymore. Slide. So after the 1954 flood, you see the rock wall on the right is part of that shade shelter we just saw. And the span of that 1923 bridge, actually both of those metal spans can be seen down in the riverbed where they've been just knocked over and utterly destroyed. All the trees you saw in the previous photo are no longer there, and you can see dead vegetation going way up the sides. You can see how much of the highway they had to rebuild. This is where we had 80 vertical feet of water come through that canyon. To show a little bit more of the scale, slide. same image, different view. You see a car going over the bridge. You see the destroyed river spans in the background, and you can still see that scour line, 80 feet up the canyon wall. This was measured or estimated to be over 1 million cubic feet per second, just an almost incomprehensible amount of water coming through. Slide. When the lake is high, of course, right now it is not high. It does not look like this today. But when the lake is up, that old highway is now a National Park Service boat ramp, and Highway 90 now uses the fancy new bridge you see at the bottom of the picture. And so that's what it looks like today. The reservoir backs all the way up to this point. You can take a boat further up the Pecos, further up the Rio Grande, or at least you can when the lake is high. Right now, it's very low. Slide. So that's kind of just illustrating the power of some of the floods. This is the Pecos within the park, but above the influence of the reservoir, and you see it's not a whole lot of volume of flow, but it's flowing crystal clear and emerald green and full of fish, and it is a paddler's paradise. I'm a kayaker and canoeer, and I love it. Slide. The Devil's River is utterly spectacular, and we have 5 miles of boundary of our park that looks more or less like what you see in that photo. That's been very, very hard to get to. But in the next year or so, Texas Parks and Wildlife Department is going to be opening up Devil's River State Natural Area, which will make some of that more accessible. So we're looking forward. We've been working with them for about the last decade as they move forward on developing that property, and that's going to make some of our prettiest but hardest to get to areas a little bit more accessible. And so we're looking forward to that. Slide. And the Rio Grande, a little bit muddier than the other two, but this is it's today. That river channel is lined with probably 30-foot tall willow trees. This picture was taken right after the reservoir had dropped, and so those river banks are just bare mud. But the willows grow pretty fast, and so it's growing up with mud. Growing up with willows. And then you see that kind of dark green line snaking up the side of the cliff there on the left bank, which is at the U.S. side of the Rio Grande. So that's Mexico on the right. That's the U.S. on the left. That is the 1880s railroad grade, and there's kind of a little gap where the green vegetation that's growing on that railroad grade is going over a canyon. That side canyon, I believe that's the side canyon where they drove the Silver Spike and the Second Transcontinental Railway was completed in 1883, which is just outside our 1144.3 foot elevation contour boundary, but definitely part of the park's history and very cool. And I'll come back and touch on that a little bit more in a second. Slide. So again, overall park map. This was supposed to cue me to talk about something specific. Let's see what that was. Slide. Okay, talking about things to do. Maybe go back one. Okay, so the reason this map was here, you can see we're pretty spread out. We have campgrounds and boat ramps on the Devil's River at Rough Canyon. We have several there along the main body of the reservoir. Diablo East is our main, our largest and most popular area. But lots of different picnic areas, hiking trails, mostly short day hikes. We don't have any long hikes at this time. But little day hikes, birding trails, that kind of thing. And then okay, and then there at the Pecos River, you can see we've got more shade shelters, a little short nature trail there, boat ramp. Slide. Okay, so things to do. The main, if you're a recreation area built around a reservoir, of course, boating and water-based recreation is going to be our focus. So, lots of boating and lots of fishing. Slide. So, good fishing of all sorts, and we're a stop on a lot of the major fishing tournaments. Slide. And so sometimes we'll have, maybe, several hundred boats on the water for a given fishing tournament. And it's amazing, just how big Amistad is, because you can start off with, a couple hundred boats, and then they just all disappear. And you can look out over the lake and you don't see one. They all just, it, it's, it's just a massive body of water. Slide. Couple of marinas. Slide. Day use areas, picnic shelters, lots of, very popular place for local families to come and spend the weekend and grill out. Slide. Yes, our picnic shelters are beautiful. Come use them. Slide. Hiking trails. This time of year, March, April, is when I think this park is the prettiest. That's when a lot of these pictures were taken. After a rain, you see all those the bushes covered with pink flowers. That's purple sage or ceniza, and it'll bloom like that after we get a heavy rain, and the whole landscape just turns pink. It's lovely. And then, kind of likewise down in the bottom right, that's black brush acacia flowers, and those turn this, beautiful kind of buttery yellow. And then the Weisach trees in the upper left, are kind of that orange. So we'll get, especially in a wet year, and this has not been an especially wet year, but especially in a wet year, it can be very, very beautiful this time of year. Slide. Um, I'm more of a photographer myself than a hunter, but we do have 5 bow hunting areas. Slide. Bow hunting for deer, and shotgun for turkey and quail, and that kind of thing. So yeah, five hunting areas, and there's not a whole lot of Texas is 95% private land, so there's not a lot of public hunting opportunities, and so this is something that's written into our enabling legislation. And we've had, I think, in the last hunting season, we had 500 hunters register with us. So something we're happy to offer. Slide. Yeah, so 836,000, almost 837,000 recreational visits in 2023, 500 hunters, lots of annual lake use boat passes. So it's a great place. Slide. But the lake goes up and down. Again, I mentioned we're in a place where our year-to-year variation in rainfall is a larger number than the annual average. And so we're on the edge of the desert, and the watersheds that feed us are in the desert. And so we're, very much at the mercy of how much rain comes in upstream, and then also at the mercy of how much people downstream need to call on their water rights and have water released for irrigation and things. So that's that. Slide. Lots of springs, and lots of wildlife, and it's been important for people for a very, very, very long time. Slide. Getting into sort of some of the ecology of it. I feel like every time you go on a trip to a park, the ranger says, hey, we're cool because we're an ecotone where all these different environmental zones come together. Well, guess what? We're an ecotone where lots of environmental zones come together. So we have the Edwards Plateau of the Texas Hill Country meeting the South Texas brushlands, the Tamaulipan thorn scrub from the southeast, and meeting the Chihuahuan Desert from the west. So we have 3 different environmental zones. We have these, 3 distinct rivers coming in. We're also, if you kind of draw a vertical line through us, we're pretty much on the 100th meridian, separating the more humid eastern U.S. from the more arid western U.S. And if you kind of see the how the Edwards Plateau, the Texas Hill Country area is kind of this brown shaded, higher elevation in the map. Following the lower edge of that, that's where Highway 90 runs going to San Antonio. It's about a 3-hour drive east to San Antonio, and then you kind of turn north along kind of like that eastern edge of the Edwards Plateau, and you get up to Austin along the Balcones Escarpment there. Texas, there's the Balcones Fault Zone. Texas split in half, and the northwestern half was uplifted, while the southeastern half was weighed down by sediments. This is when you got mountain building in the western U.S. And so Texas kind of snapped in half along that line. And with that uplift, rain that falls on the Edwards Plateau and works its way down into the aquifers, sinks in, then hits a confining, harder limestone unit, and then kind of flows through the ground until it comes out along that southeastern edge. And there's many very large springs that come out along that area. And so that's part of what makes our area, so unique. I, showed you the pictures of, the beautiful clear Devil's River and how clear the Pecos River is. The third and fourth largest springs in Texas are here in Valverde County, also. So springs are in the, and innumerable smaller springs all throughout here. Slide. Here's one of them. This is called Indian Springs. This is on the Devil's River. This is a very popular destination for boaters. It's maybe about 10 miles north of upstream of the Rough Canyon boat ramp. When the lake is high like this, you can take your boat right up to where the water is gushing out of the side of the cliff and coming into the lake. Right now, you probably can't get within a mile or two of it, unfortunately. But it's beautiful. Slide. Up the Rio Grande arm, underneath, would be under 110 feet of water. It's considerably less than that now, but still deeply under the reservoir, is a spring called Goodenough Springs. It is now the fourth largest spring in Texas, and it's discharging 89 million gallons of water per day. So it's flowing 100 to 200 cubic feet per second, which is about as much as we usually get from either the Devils or the Pecos River. So it's basically a whole other underground river coming into the reservoir through this spring. And you can see, again, going back to Allison was talking about, people capturing water for energy. You can see this old water wheel coming from the spring flow coming out of Goodenough Springs there in the historic photo. So it's something we do. Slide. So migratory routes, birds fly through here on their migrations, as do the monarch butterflies that Allison was talking about. So slide. And that's one of my favorite times. Is it'll be usually about second week of October. They'll pass through here on the migration headed south. And if it's a good year and the migration hits us directly, we'll just have thousands of butterflies. Slide. And there's a couple of trees, especially by one of our campsites, that they prefer to roost in, and so we'll close down those campsites. And it's just magical to get to be near there and see and to hear the sound of butterfly wings flapping is just magical. Slide. So as an archaeologist, I'm going to go back to a couple of thousand years ago and kind of work my way back a little bit. Native American groups were here from the end of the last ice age on. Just outside our park boundary, there's the oldest and southernmost buffalo jump kill site in North America at Bonfire Shelter. That was actually excavated. It was a Park Service funded excavations in the 1960s that did the work on that. But extinct bison antiquus, buffalo or bison were run off the top of the cliff by people in Folsom times. People here were hunter-gatherers. They did not grow crops. They did not build permanent houses. They did not live in villages. They lived very light on the land. They probably picked up and moved with everything they owned probably every few days. Probably didn't spend much more than a week in any given location at any given time. In the illustration in the background, you see a large rock shelter, and people would have lived in rock shelters. Again, if you're picking up and moving, it doesn't make a whole lot of sense to invest much time in architecture. They may have made little, temporary brush huts, but I bet in times of severe weather and whatnot, they'd have tried to, head for the nearest rock shelter. These rock shelters and the dry climate have preserved sandals, baskets, mats, nets, all kinds of small items that normally don't preserve in archaeological sites, and pieces of leftovers from their dinners. And then it sounds kind of gross, but it's also preserved coprolites, dried human poop. And so in the same way a science class can take apart an owl pellet and see what the owl was eating, archaeology grad students can take apart human poop and see what ancient peoples were eating. And it gets you all kinds of cool information about diet and health and nutrition and that kind of thing. So, slide. The picture there with the dock and the boat, that is Panther Cave. When the reservoir is full, it is accessible only by boat. Unfortunately, right now, that part of the reservoir is dry, and it's really not accessible at all, except you can get the same view you have here in this picture. And so if you have a telephoto lens or binoculars, you may be able to see, the panther and a little bit kind of over the tops of those trees from Seminole Canyon State Park. But unfortunately, this is not a real good time to see that, although Seminole Canyon State Park does have tours to other sites on their property. And here in our park visitor center, we have a floor-to-ceiling wall-size photo mosaic of part of the wall of Panther Cave that lets you see it fairly well. So that's the next best thing to visiting that. But the rock art in our region is between 1400 to over 4,000 years old. It's there's rock art all over the western U.S., but the Pecos River style rock art is only found right here in this region, about a 60-mile radius from where the Pecos River flows into the Rio Grande. Slide. Slide. Okay, so coming forward in time, I mentioned what we were kind of 1830s, 1840s. Republic of Texas had joined the U.S. in 1845. This map is 1857, and we're going to, well, you can see on the right hand side, you've got San Antonio. We're kind of in the middle. You can see Big Bend. You got El Paso and the kind of the far upper left corner of the map. So next slide is going to zoom in a little bit on our area. You can see San Antonio now in the lower right. You've got San Antonio El Paso Road. You've got a series of forts coming through. You see Fort Clark kind of in the lower center of the slide. That's in Brackettville, Texas now. You see where it says Indian Trail there. Fort Clark was on the Las Moras Springs. Was a major spring. That Indian Trail was a Comanche raiding trail down into Mexico. And Fort Clark was placed there to deny those springs to the Comanches. So that's something else I'll mention about going back to the Mexican War. When the Mexican War concludes with the Treaty of Guadalupe Hidalgo, one of the conditions was that the U.S. was required to try to keep the hostile native groups on our side of the Rio Grande. Mexico agreed that the Rio Grande could be the border, but the U.S. was supposed to keep raiders on the north side, and so it created this chain of forts. But also, 1848 Treaty of Guadalupe Hidalgo, but also 1848 gold is discovered in California, and so U.S. Army creates the San Antonio El Paso Road, which winds up being tying into the Chihuahua Trail, and is a way for people to get out further west. And so you see Fort Clark coming to the west from Fort Clark. You see it says Rio San Pedro. That's the old Spanish name for what we today call the Devil's River. And basically that path is Highway 90. And then if you were to take Highway 163 north out of Comstock and cross the Devil's River, that's where Camp Hudson was. And that was, so the first crossing of the Devil's River was, down there kind of where you see it on the map. And then the second crossing is at Camp Hudson. And then on up to Fort Lancaster. This map's 1857. At this time, there was no settlement between Fort Clark and Fort Lancaster. This was the bleeding edge of the frontier. There's some great books. This is if you want to read more about this area, this is a great one. This is Devil's River, Treacherous Twin to the Pecos by Patrick Darren. This is the Wild West. I mean, you've got bandits and it's train robberies. It's wild. Oh, train robberies not in the 1850s. That comes after, but this is Wild West. You don't get any settlement in what we now call, so Del Rio is first settled in the 1860s. I mentioned 1848 gold, California. Can we go back one slide? Oh goodness, 2 slides. There we go. Okay, park map. On the lower right, you see it says Diablo East on the Devil's River. Above that, it says Castle Canyon. It says Spur 406. Above the text that says Spur 406, you see that creek is labeled California Creek. So that 1848 road crossing that first crossing of the Devil's River came up California Creek, because if you were headed to California, that was your path. And so you see that lingering even in our place names still today. Okay, so we can go forward. Okay. Second Transcontinental Railway. This is I mentioned that the Silver Spike was driven on a trestle here. In the early 1880s, they did not have the technology to build a bridge that would span the large canyon of the Pecos, so they had to blast this grade into the side of the cliff. They said that for the construction east of the Devil's River, I think it was about 500 kegs of black powder per mile. Allison mentioned immigrant labor, like Irish and Italian. We had Irish and Italian work crews working east to west on the railroad through here, and we had Chinese crews working west to east. And there's been some neat, master's theses and such, looking at the archaeological sites from these old railroad construction camps and seeing what people were eating and life in the different camps. But so this is where the two the eastern part would have met the western part. Slide. The oldest and longest railroad tunnel in the state of Texas is inside the park. And this section of track has been abandoned now, and it has a nice bat colony in it. And when the reservoir is full, you can actually boat right up to it. In fact, in some cases, you can even boat through it. Although we don't encourage that, because there's usually flood debris in there, and also there's a colony of bats inside, and we don't want to disturb the bats. And actually, but that's one of the cool thing to do is take your boat up there, and then around sunset watch the bat flight coming out of the railroad tunnel. So it doesn't match Carlsbad's bat flight, but we have our own bat flight. Slide. Here is 1880s railroad engine coming across that low bridge at the mouth of the Pecos. So the canyon on the far left is the Rio Grande. The canyon on the right there is the Pecos. So this is the confluence. Slide. It was very difficult to maintain. Every time it rained, there were rock falls, and it was a big mess to try to maintain the tracks. Also took a lot of extra fuel to get the trains up and down the grades. So 1892, they constructed the Pecos High Bridge, which was, I think, one of the, if not the highest railroad bridges in the world at the time it was built, 321 feet high. Absolutely phenomenal. Slide. And in 1943, the 1892 bridge was pretty spindly and not able to support the weight of the World War II supply trains going coast to coast. So in 1943, they redesigned it, and the new bridge was built right next to, immediately downstream from the original. And that's what we still have today, is the 1943 bridge. Slide. On the Devil's River, there's a series of power plants. This is the Devil's Lake Dam. This is, I don't know, maybe about 100 yards, a couple hundred yards downstream of our Rough Canyon boat ramp now. And you can see on the right-hand side of the picture, you see that building with 3 windows in it. That's the powerhouse that held the electrical generators. So this was late 1920s that this is being built, part of the rural electrification program and supplying power to Val Verde County. There were two dams with hydroelectric plants along the Devil's River, and then one gasoline-powered steam plant, and that provided power here. All 3 of those facilities got submerged underneath Lake Amistad when the Amistad Reservoir, when the Amistad Dam was built. But today, with our low lake levels, those 3 big windows are becoming visible again. That powerhouse is visible again. So that's kind of neat. Slide. So this is that same structure, but this is like from a boat on the reservoir. You kind of see, or on the reservoir, on the Devil's Lake, looking downstream. The water is dammed up by the next hydroelectric plant downstream, which is Lake Walk. And looks like you could fairly easily go over the edge of that if you weren't paying too much attention in your boat. So, slide. I mentioned the steam plant. This is, I think, the 1932 flood. There was also another big flood in 1948, and then the 54 flood. So the 54 flood was the biggest and scariest and worst of them all. But there were, this area, as I said, is prone to significant flooding. And again, that's why we have a dam. I think the 1954 flood was estimated to have been a 1 in 2,000 year flood event. Slide. Okay, that's my last slide, actually, right at 8 o'clock your time. So I think beyond this, I have a bunch of pretty pictures of the park. So I will turn it back over to you, Allison.
Yeah, I know that we certainly have some questions in the chat. So just for now, I'm going to stop sharing the screen. And maybe we'll keep the recording on just for a little bit more. Usually we chat for a few minutes afterward. Kind of see, let's see, can we take one question? Would that work for you?
Take as many questions as you like.
Excellent. So a question from Kathy is, what is the water quality of the rivers that flow through your park? Which I think is a great question.
It's excellent. One of the kind of the fun things, so the Devil's River, for example, is the clearest, cleanest river in the state of Texas. Again, it never rains out here, and so you've got spring water flowing out over limestone bedrock, so there's nothing bringing sediment into it. You don't really have any communities around it to speak of. So just wonderful water quality. And our rivers are are very unusual. I think most rivers, probably the water quality decreases the farther you get from the headwaters as more and more stuff gets washed into them. In in the case of the rivers flowing into Amistad, the water quality increases and it gets less salty. It gets clearer because you've got more and more spring water coming in, and so for example, the Pecos near Carlsbad looks nothing like the Pecos here. The Pecos, our Pecos, really kind of starts south of Interstate 10. The Nature Conservancy has a preserve at Independence Creek, and there's springs there at Independence Creek that flow into the Pecos, and then from there you just get more and more and more springs. And so what starts off as kind of a salty river, in fact, the Spanish name for the Pecos was the Rio Salado. But the farther you go downstream, the more and more and more springs come in, and the cleaner and clearer it gets, and the more flow.
So we asked you, oh, sorry, go ahead.
No, yeah.
So we asked you to do something very hard, which is you think in scales of thousands of years, and to condense that and to tell us a story of a really complex area. When we first had our conversation, I talked about Slater Mill, which is in the visual behind me with the beautiful Blackstone River and the natural falls and the dammed falls. We talked about, how many changes in just 200 years these places have experienced. And when we started our conversation between the two parks, it wasn't about water. It was about butterflies and pollinators. And we're looking forward to those little signs of spring that I think we're hoping are going to start happening here in New England. But I love this idea of, even on a human scale, a simple question, right? Connecting through friendship, our two parks, this kind of similar idea. And thinking about the way that some people responded to industry in New England, there were people who had a lot of anxiety about all these changes to the landscape. And there were poets in England who, by the early 1800s, they retreated to natural areas. They didn't want to be around industry. And one of these people was William Blake, who wrote a poem that I think we'll end the formal part on, because it captures what I love about this series, which is little connections and big stories. And William Blake did not know about the butterfly effect. He didn't have those theories at all. But he invited us to see a world in a grain of sand, heaven in a wildflower, and to hold infinity in the palm of our hand and eternity in an hour.